It's funny when people talk about Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, they almost always focus on the start of the journey.
Right, the exciting stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They want the desire, they want the faith, they definitely want the money. It's like everyone memorizes the first taste steps of the recipe, they throw all the ingredients in the pot, turn up the heat, and then they wonder why the meal tastes
Or
terrible.
why the stove just, never actually turned on in the first place.
Right. And that is exactly why we are skipping straight to the back of the book today. Because I think most people don't realize that the most crucial part of Hill's philosophy isn't really about what you need to add to your life, it's about what you need to remove.
It's the diagnostic chapter.
Yeah.
And that's such a vital point. I mean, Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich as this comprehensive roadmap, but he saved chapter 15, which is titled How to Outwit the Six Ghosts of Fear for the very end.
And there's a spooky title for you.
It is. But he did that for a very specific reason. If you've applied all the other principles, the auto-suggestion, the mastermind group, the specialized knowledge, and you're still broke or unhappy, this chapter is basically the mechanic telling you exactly which part of your engine is busted.
It's the cleaning house phase. And honestly, looking at this chapter again for our deep dive today, it just hits differently than the rest of the book.
Oh, for sure.
The rest of the book is super inspiring, right? But this chapter is, well, it's a bit of a slap in the face. It really forces you to look in the mirror.
It has to be that way, though.
Yeah.
You have to remember the context. Hill wrote this in 1938. The world was just barely clawing its way out of the Great Depression, so he saw firsthand that the biggest barrier to wealth wasn't necessarily a lack of opportunity. It was a paralysis of the mind.
A total mental block.
Exactly. And he calls them ghosts because they are invisible, but their effect on your life is incredibly tangible.
So, if you're listening, our mission today is to drag these ghosts out into the sunlight. We're going to look at what Hill calls the unholy trio. We'll diagnose which of the six ghosts might be haunting you right now, and then we're going to break down Hill's specific antidote. And I will warn you, some of this is going to feel a bit personal.
Yeah, if it doesn't feel personal, you probably aren't looking hard enough at your own habits.
Fair point. So let's start with the root of the problem. Hill introduces this concept of the unholy trio. It sounds dramatic, almost biblical really, but it's actually a very logical breakdown of how psychological failure happens. So what exactly are we looking at here?
It's a chain reaction. It all starts with indecision. That is the seedling. Hill is very specific about this. Indecision is the one thing you actually can control, but if you neglect it, it starts the rot. If you allow indecision to just stay in your mind, it crystallizes into doubt.
Okay, so I can't make up my mind, which then leads me to question my own ability or my circumstances.
Exactly. And then the chemical reaction happens. Indecision and doubt blend together, and when they mix, they become the third element, which is fear.
So fear isn't just this random emotion that strikes you out of nowhere from the outside. It's actually a manufactured product of your own hesitation.
Precisely. And the dangerous part, the part Hill really emphasizes here, is that this process is very slow. He says these enemies germinate and grow without their presence being observed.
They sneak up on you.
They really do. You don't wake up one morning completely terrified of life. You wake up one morning, it's a little unsure. So you put off a decision, you hesitate, then you start to doubt, and then months or maybe even years later, you're completely paralyzed.
That's the classic boiling frog scenario. But here's the part that I think people miss, especially if they haven't read chapter 14 right before this one. Why does this fear actually stop you from getting rich? It's not just that you're too scared to ask your boss for a raise, right? It's more technical than that.
It is highly technical, at least in the context of Hill's philosophy. This connects directly back to his concept of the sixth sense. In the previous chapter, Hill argues that the sixth sense is the door to the temple of wisdom. It's basically the receiving set for your creative imagination. It's how you get those sudden flashes of genius or intuition.
It's the million-dollar ideas.
Right. But in chapter 15, he explicitly states that the sixth sense simply cannot function if these three negatives, indecision, doubt, and fear, exist in the mind.
It's like radio static.
That's the perfect analogy. If your mind is vibrating with a frequency of fear, you are jamming your own signal. Infinite intelligence might be broadcasting the exact solution to all your problems, but your receiver is completely drowned out by the noise of your own worry. You literally cannot hear the answer.
That makes this so much more urgent. We aren't just talking about, feeling brave or confident. We're talking about fixing the equipment so it actually works. So let's look at the interference itself. Hill identifies 6 ghosts of fear, and he doesn't just list them, he gives actual symptoms. I want to dig into these symptoms because a lot of them really surprised me.
They are surprising. The six are the fear of poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death.
Let's start with the big one, the fear of poverty. Now, I think most people listening would say, well, I'm not afraid of poverty, I just want more money. But Hill lists symptoms that look very different from just being scared of being poor.
This is where the self-inventory gets pretty brutal. One of the main symptoms he lists for the fear of poverty is indifference.
Indifference, but that sounds like the exact opposite of fear.
You would think so, right? But Hill argues that saying things like, oh, I don't care about money or I'm content with my lot in life is very often just a defense mechanism. It's a way to avoid the struggle entirely. If you accept poverty with a shrug, that is the fear of poverty manifesting as laziness or a lack of ambition.
Wow. So procrastination is actually a symptom of fear.
One of the most common ones. You put off the work because you are subconsciously afraid it won't yield results anyway, so you just endure the poverty instead. He also lists doubt in general, just constantly making excuses for why you haven't succeeded yet.
That hits close to home for a lot of people, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Okay, what about the fear of criticism? Hill says this one is almost universal.
And it's arguably the most deadly one for a career. The symptoms here are things like a lack of poise, being visibly nervous or awkward in front of others, but also a lack of initiative, failing to embrace opportunities because you are terrified of what other people will say if you fail.
He mentions keeping up with the Joneses in this section too, doesn't he?
He does. Spending money you don't actually have just to impress people you probably don't even like is a direct symptom of the fear of criticism. You are so terrified of being seen as less than that you willingly enslave yourself to debt. That isn't ambition, that's fear.
That's a massive distinction. Ambition is playing to win, but spending to impress is just playing not to lose. Now, the third one usually gets a laugh, but it's actually quite serious. The fear of ill health.
Right, hypochondria.
Yes, but he links it to something deeper than that. It's not just thinking you're sick all the time. It's actually using sickness.
Absolutely. The symptom is the habit of faking illness to cover for plain old laziness, or using delicate health as an alibi for why you haven't achieved your goals, like saying, oh, I would have started that business, but my nerves are just too bad. Hill calls that out as a direct manifestation of fear.
Because it's a socially accepted excuse. If you say I'm lazy, people judge you. But if you say I have a bad back, people sympathize with you.
Exactly. And the real danger there, according to Hill, is the law of autosuggestion. If you constantly talk about disease, if you worry about disease and actively look for symptoms, you are basically instructing your subconscious mind to produce that disease. You are placing a psychological order for the very thing you claim to fear.
We'll get to the medicine chest cure for that in a minute, which is just wild. But let's quickly touch on the other three: loss of love, old age, and death.
Loss of love often shows up as jealousy or constant fault-finding in your relationships. The fear of old age shows up as always apologizing for your age, thinking of yourself as washed up just because you hit 40 or 60.
Yeah.
And the fear of death, well, that usually manifests as a total lack of purpose. If you're terrified of the end, you're usually paralyzed in the present.
The common thread running through all of these seems to be what he calls a failure consciousness.
That's the core binary Hill operates on in this chapter. You are either success conscious or failure conscious. You cannot be both at the same time. It's like a light switch. You can't have a room that is half lit and half dark from the same bulb. If you indifferently allow these ghosts to just loiter in your mind, you are actively opting into failure consciousness.
So we have the diagnosis now. We're infected with indecision, we're broadcasting static, and we're making endless excuses. Now we need the cure. Hill's solution is, well, on the surface it sounds a bit like a cheap bumper sticker. He says the ultimate cure is decision.
It does sound a bit simplistic at first glance, but we really have to look at what he means by decision. He doesn't mean a wish or a preference, he means a complete severance. The word decide actually comes from the Latin decider, which literally means to cut off.
Cutting off any other possibility.
Right. And to prove this point, Hill tells the story of the man in the death cell. This is one of the most striking visceral images in the entire book. He describes interviewing a man on death row just 2 hours before his execution. And this guy is sitting there eating a massive meal, calm as a cucumber.
Yeah, the book says he was eating enough for 3 people. I mean, most of us lose our appetite if we just get a stressful email from our boss, let alone staring down the electric chair.
Exactly. And when Hill asks the man how he could possibly be so calm, the man says, I have felt fine ever since I learned for certain that I must die.
That is just profound. He made up his mind to accept it.
It's the ultimate proof of the concept. The man wasn't actually suffering from the event itself. He was suffering from the uncertainty of the event. Once the decision was final, even though it was a grim decision about his own inevitable death, the fear completely vanished. Decision eliminates the worry.
But hold on a second. I can hear you listening to this right now and saying, okay, that's great for a guy on death row who literally has no other choice. But I have a mortgage, I have bills to pay. Simply deciding not to be afraid of poverty doesn't magically put cash in my bank account. How does Hill bridge that practical gap?
That's the most critical pushback.
Yeah.
Hill would argue that deciding not to fear poverty doesn't print money for you, no. But it clears the static. Remember the radio receiver analogy? When you firmly decide to get along with whatever wealth you can accumulate without worry, you stop vibrating with that frequency of fear.
And when the fear stops, the sixth sense can finally work again.
Exactly. You get your brain back. You can't solve a complex financial crisis when you are physically paralyzed by the terror of it. You can only solve it when you accept the worst-case scenario, decide firmly that you can survive it, and then get to work.
So the decision isn't just, I decide to be a millionaire tomorrow. It's more like, I decide that a lack of money will no longer intimidate me.
Correct. It's about reclaiming your mental real estate.
Let's get into the actionable steps here, because Hill actually gives us a literal inventory to take. And for the fear of ill health, he gives instructions that I am pretty sure no modern doctor would ever endorse. But the psychological point he's making is fascinating.
He says, and I quote, "Clean out your medicine chest. Throw away all pill bottles and stop pandering to colds, aches, pains, and imaginary illness."
Throw away the pills. Now, quick disclaimer here. Please do not throw away your prescribed heart medication because of a deep dive you listen to. But what is he really getting at with this?
He's attacking the safety net. If you keep a cabinet totally full of remedies for every possible what-if scenario, you are essentially planning to get sick. He wants you to stop pandering to every little complaint your body has. It's about aggressively shifting your mental focus from sickness back to health.
It's the exact same logic with the social inventory he recommends. He talks about the fear of criticism and says we need to keep our minds closed. Which is funny because usually being told you have a closed mind is an insult.
But here, it's a fortress. He says you must keep your mind closed against people who depress or discourage you. This is essentially the social medicine chest. You need to throw away the toxic people in your life just like you throw away the pill bottles.
If you have a friend who is constantly telling you to be realistic or always pointing out exactly why your new idea will fail, they are just feeding your fear of criticism.
They're acting as a carrier for the virus of fear. Hill says you have a duty to cut that supply line off. You have to deliberately seek the company of people who influence you to think and act for yourself.
There is one section in this chapter that I think is pure comedy, but also deep tragedy at the same time. It's the list of alibis.
Oh, the 57 famous alibis.
Yes. He says, success requires no explanations. Failure permits no alibis. That is such a hard, uncompromising line. And then he just lists these excuses that people constantly use to explain away their lack of success. We have to read a few of these because they are truly timeless.
They really are. Things like, if I only had money, or if I only had a pull, if I were not so fat, if I were not so thin.
If I could only meet the right people. If I had been born rich.
My absolute favorite one on the list is, if I were only younger. And that literally 3 lines down, he writes, if I were only older.
He covers every single base. But why does he include this massive list? Is it just to mock the reader?
No, it's to show us that we are absolute creative geniuses when it comes to defending our own failures. Hill says we build these elaborate alibis to protect our egos. We would much rather say the whole world is against me than just admit I didn't do the work. If you are making excuses, you are being haunted by one of the ghosts.
But the alibi is a lie.
It's a fatal lie, because once you articulate the alibi, you stick to it, you defend it. If you say, I can't succeed because I have a family to support, you have just consciously turned your family into your obstacle. You've convinced your subconscious that as long as you have a family, you cannot win. You've written your own failure script.
And that perfectly leads us to the grand finale of the book, the section on absolute control. Because after stripping away all the excuses and all the fears and all the ghosts, Hillen leaves us with just one thing.
The only thing. He says that the Creator provided man with absolute control over but one thing, and that is the power to control his own thoughts.
Everything else, the weather, the economy, other people's opinions, death itself, is completely out of our hands.
Completely. And Hill's central argument is that this isn't a limitation, it's actually a profound gift. Because you can control your thought impulses, you have a responsibility to use them constructively. If you can control your thoughts, you control your destiny. But if you fail to exercise this privilege,
You just cast yourself onto the broad sea of circumstance.
and you get tossed around like a chip on the waves, that is the ultimate choice. You are either the captain of your soul or you are driftwood. There is no middle management in your own mind.
It goes right back to the thoughts are things concept from the very first chapter. It's a complete full circle.
It is. If thoughts are things, then fear is a very real thing. It's a physical barrier you are building in your own way. But a decision is also a thing. It's a battering ram. Once a thought is released, it plants itself in the subconscious. You absolutely must be the gatekeeper.
So, as we wrap up, for everyone who has been with us through this deep dive, if you are feeling a bit called out right now, what is the very first step? You've identified the ghost. Let's say it's the fear of criticism. You realize you haven't launched that project you've been working on because you're terrified of a bad comment. What do you do today?
You have to make a decision that proves the ghost wrong. Not just a thought, an actual action. If you fear criticism, post the work today. If you fear poverty, go give $1 away to charity right now to prove to your subconscious that you aren't destitute.
You have to break the pattern.
Exactly. Hill says life is a checkerboard and the player opposite you is time. Time isn't waiting around for you to get over your fear. The move is yours.
And if you hesitate,
Time will simply wipe your pieces off the board.
that is a very sobering thought, but also an incredibly empowering one. You have the move.
You always have the move.
I want to leave you with that final image of the man in the death cell we talked about. Because wealth isn't just about the hustle or the business plan. It's about clearing the mental interference of fear through decisive action. So think about this. If a man facing electric execution can find peace and a hearty appetite simply by making up his mind to accept reality, what excuse do you have for letting the fear of what others think ruin your day?
We have no excuse, only alibis. And we know exactly what to do with those now.
Throw them out with the pill bottles. Thanks for diving deep with us on this classic. Go do your personal inventory.
See you next time.